I would like to thank all of you for making it here on a Saturday afternoon, and I know that it's a good reason to come in on a Saturday afternoon. This is actually only our second physical event for the Changemakers series. Many of you have been logging on and signing in for the last 6 months. They've all been virtual events so far. And it gives me great pleasure to host this series for the first time on the campus here at GITAM in Bengaluru, and to have with us somebody who, I like to use the cliche, really doesn't need an introduction. We know him in so many avatars. We know him as Gandhi's biographer, a chronicler of Indian history, of modern India, of the contemporary times, the times we live in at the moment, of Indian politics, and of course of cricket. So Ramachandra Guha, everybody, a big round of applause for our changemaker today.
Thank you.
I have had the pleasure of interviewing Ram Guha over the years on a series of issues that affect the country, of course on his books, on the state of Indian politics, and I think more than ever today, India needs voices like his, who are not afraid to speak out, to speak up, and voice their opinion. We are clearly at a crossroads in our democracy today, and somebody like Ram Guha is fearless in standing up for India's democratic values, and isn't afraid also to criticize those who might be more ideologically aligned with him, even though he ends up then facing brickbats from all sides. So Ram Guha, wonderful to meet you again and get to know you perhaps a little more personally today, because that's what we're trying to do in this series, and hope that the students take away lessons from that. First of all, what has the pandemic been like for you the last year and a half, 2 years?
The pandemic, Nidhi, it's been incredibly difficult for many people, but let me talk about the upsides for me. So what the pandemic has done for me is it's allowed me to rediscover my love of fiction. So, I would read a lot when I was a college boy, a time when I was fortunate in retrospect because there were no smartphones, there was no television, and there were no laptops, so I would read. So I read a lot of 20th century fiction growing up. So Somerset Maugham, Ernest Hemingway, George Orwell, Agatha Christie, crime stories. And then I became a historian, and I only began reading serious history, biography, politics kind of stuff. And my default relaxation was watching cricket or listening to classical music. But the pandemic has given me all this time, because I don't travel, to read classic fiction. So I read 2 great novels by Tolstoy, Anna Karenina and War and Peace, and George Eliot's magnificent Middlemarch, and some other works by Penelope Fitzgerald, who's a great underrated 20th century British novelist, Barbara Pym, another person who writes quiet novels about middle class life. So the joy of reading fiction, and I don't say this out of any sense of false modesty. A historian is a craftsman. A great novelist is an artist, and sometimes a genius. So Penelope Fitzgerald is an artist. Julian Barnes is an artist. Tolstoy and George Eliot are geniuses. So it's been just wonderful for me to read all this fiction.
Was this the second reading of War and Peace or the first?
First reading. Again.
Really?
So again, there's a footnote to this. My mother-in-law, Shanta Keshavan, who was a great reader of fiction, told me War and Peace is the best book she's ever read. Now, Gandhi himself admired Tolstoy for his philosophical views, for his views on non-violence, for his views on religious tolerance. But there is no record that Gandhi ever read War and Peace. So I said, Gandhi's biographer must read War and Peace. But they're just truly, and Middlemarch is so subtle, so insightful, particularly on 19th century British culture, politics, law, that I recommend it to everyone in this room. War and Peace and Middlemarch, before you, not today, not tomorrow, not while you're doing your degrees, but before you reach the age of 50, read those 2 books. It took me 60, but read them before you reach 50.
So we want to try and get to know you personally a bit better. You were born in Dehradun. Your father was with the Forest Research Institute. Your mother was teaching. What was your childhood actually like? Was it very sort of ordinary? Was there anything that stood out for you? What was it like?
So it was blessed in terms of natural beauty. So this is long before Dehradun became the capital of Uttarakhand, which kind of destroyed it in an ecological sense. So in the campus of the FRI, you had 400 species of birds. From our garden, you had, or not from our garden per se, from the cricket ground in which I played, southwards you saw the Shivaliks, northwards you saw the Himalaya. It was a campus well appointed, you had friends, mostly male friends, because there wasn't much mixing of boys and girls when you were young, but you could play cricket, you could play football, there was a decent library. So it was really an idyllic childhood, except for the fact that I was a chronic asthmatic. So, and Dehradun is very bad for asthma because it's extremely damp, there are abrupt changes of season. So there were some miserable times when I was in hospital, but otherwise it was blessed. I had very loving, caring parents, non-sectarian parents. My father was a scientist, which meant, among other things, that although technically I was born in a Brahmin household, I have never worn a thread. I was never asked to wear a thread. My mother was completely, she would go to temple, but she was completely ecumenical in her friendships. Her closest friends in school were her fellow school teachers, who was someone called Nigat Hussain and someone called Rita Hensman. So you get a sense of the kind of upbringing I had, for which I am profoundly grateful.
How did your interest in cricket start? Did it start in your childhood?
Yes, my interest in cricket started because my mama, my mother's brother, was a very good cricketer. And mama, a very special relationship in India with your mother's brother. And my mama had no children of his own. So he said, I'm going to make my nephew a test cricketer, which of course he eventually failed by some distance. But it's my mama's love of cricket that I inherited. And then growing up in this campus with enough boys to have a cricket team, kind of sort of furthered that. And then I played, of course, in school and college and so on.
Did you actually have serious dreams of pursuing a career in cricket?
Yeah, till the age of about 20. I was obsessed with cricket. And all I wanted to do was play cricket, read about cricket, practice. At the age of 20, I realized that I was never going to play cricket for India. If I was very lucky, I could play for some small Ranji Trophy team like Himachal Pradesh or Tripura, but even that would require great amount of luck.
What did you do? Were you a batsman? Did you bowl?
I was a bowler. You
were a bowler.
And I played in the best college team in India. So in St. Stephen's College in Delhi, two of my teammates, Arun Lal and Kirti Azad, played cricket for India. So I played very good competitive cricket, and I'm grateful for that experience because it gives you the discipline of working hard, practicing, being in a team, learning to accept failure, glorying in somebody else's success. You may have scored a duck, but Arun Lal has scored 100 and your team has won. So it's a very good team sport, not so much individual sport. Team sport is a very good training in life. My daughter was a state junior basketball player in Karnataka, and I think it's helped her a great deal in her work. So it's not so much individual sport because you're all alone and playing against yourself, but playing football or tennis or football or hockey or cricket or volleyball or basketball, I think is very good training.
What would you say, and maybe I got a hint of it when you talked about your parents and your mother in particular, but is that what really shaped your outlook towards life or your value system? Is that something you inherited from them?
So I'd say, again, if I may give a somewhat extended answer to this, because I've been thinking about it quite a lot. Nidhi, I was a child of privilege in 5 senses. I was a Hindu, where Hindus are the dominant community. I was an upper caste Hindu. I was a male. I was English speaking. And I was heterosexual. So there are 5 forms of privilege. I'm incredibly privileged in that I belong to 5 privileged groups. And most of my life, I've tried to, obviously I can't disavow the privileges, give me lots of advantages, but understand the advantages this privilege gives me. So early on, because of my parents, I overcame the prejudice of caste and religion. So there's never been a casteist or communal bone in me. My father's closest friend, and we're talking about the 1970s and 80s, was actually gay. He couldn't come out because of the time. He happens to be a great scientist, a famous food historian called K.T. Achaya, whose books are still quoted. So I understood what it meant to have a different sexual orientation. I had friends who spoke Hindi and Tamil. It took me the longest time to be less of a patriarch. I'd say the other forms of privilege I was able to understand, handle, try and overcome. But it's only when my daughter came along and when she became an adult and stridently challenged me that I have become less of a patriarch. I think I've never been communal or casteist, but I think much of my life I lived as a male patriarch, which I regret.
You went to the Doon school, another privilege actually, if you look at it that way. How did those years shape you?
I was not happy at school. My father felt it's the best school in the locality. He must put his savings in sending me there. Again, patriarchy at work. I have one sibling, a sister, who's actually intellectually more alert than me and better at sport. But she went to a day school. The savings were used to send the boy to a boarding school, an expensive boarding school, which is kind of typical in those days. It was really Delhi University which I really enjoyed. And Delhi University was an extension of the Forest Research Institute in that it's also an all India university in which really distinctions, at least in my time, distinctions of caste and community and region didn't really count at all. And I was very happy in Delhi University socially.
So I also read that you failed the civil service exam. Were you very keen on being in the civil services? What was that like for you?
No, I was a confused young man. One part of me wanted to become a journalist. I'd failed as a cricketer. One part of me wanted to be a journalist. One part of me wanted to do public service. So I got into the NDDB to run cooperatives. We're talking about the birth centenary of Varghese Kurian, which is being observed this week. And I got into the first batch of the Rural Management Institute. Part of me wanted to do a PhD because my father and grandfather had PhDs. And part of me said, let me have a crack at the civil service. So it was kind of a half-hearted crack. And I came to Bangalore, studied for it, and in the course of studying for it, discovered my love of sociology and history. I had studied economics in university, which I didn't like, and then never appeared again for the civil service and went off to do a PhD.
I think there's an interesting life lesson here, because what I take away from this is that you don't actually have to know what path you may follow. You can change your mind, you can try different things, and maybe that's something students can take away from that.
Absolutely. And you'll have to choose your parents wisely, because my parents never pushed me, particularly my father, who was an extraordinary human being. I mean, as an Indian parent, as an Indian father in the 1960s, teaching his daughter how to cycle, hurdling with her, teaching his son bird watching. He was an exemplary parent. And when we grew up, my sister saw me as an asthmatic, a younger brother, and said, I want to become a doctor. There also were some doctors in the family. So she was clear. She became a very well-respected professor of medicine, ending up retiring from St. John's College in Bangalore. But I was confused, and my father said, doesn't matter. I got a second class in my BA. He said, you want to do an MA? Do an MA. I got a second class in my MA. I said, Appa, I want a year off to think. Okay. So I think it's very important to have indulgent parents. While in my case, because I went to Doon School and St. Stephen's, I was privileged. I spoke very good English. I had extracurricular record. I played cricket. I was running the quiz team. I could have got a job in any blue chip English-speaking company like ITC or Hindustan Lever. But my father never said do anything. He said, you want to do a PhD, even though it's untested, go ahead. So I think I was particularly lucky in my parents who gave me the space and the room to find myself. And it's more in that way. Obviously children must not, young kids, none of you are children, young students must explore and not make up your minds. Sometimes you're very clear. Some people at 17 and 18 and 19 know what they want to do. One of my Doon School contemporaries, Amitav Ghosh, knew at the age of 15 he wanted to become a novelist. But most others are a little confused. They want to explore, they want to have diverse experiences. And you must allow that in yourself, and hopefully your family must also be supportive, so that you finally find your balance and do what you really want to do.
Sometimes you can change your mind in your 40s, like me. So you
of
never
course,
know.
Of course.
You never know how that works out. It's interesting, you sound, when you talk about college, I read somewhere where you said that you were lost when you were at St. Stephen's until you met your wife. Is that true?
No. I was lost. No, it's not at St. Stephen's. It's after St. Stephen's.
Okay.
I was a drifter.
Okay.
I had too many interests. You know, I was, you know, as I said, after St. Stephen's, I had 5 options and drifting around. And then I met Sujata, who was then in design school in Ahmedabad. And she gave me a kind of focus in life. You know, I think in many ways, whatever I've done and all the books I've written is really because of her support, her anchoring, and also her intellectual feedback. I mean, she's absolutely my fiercest critic. And also the good luck of having, you know, someone or like her whom you can live with.
So is it true, again, when I was looking at the jobs that you turned down, actually, I found them much more interesting and more revealing about your personality than what you eventually ended up doing. A job with the Times of India as a journalist, a professorship at the Delhi School of Economics, and at the National Law School, Bangalore, because apparently you didn't like the idea of clocking in 9 to 5 or whatever. You said no to those jobs.
There's some others also overseas, but we can
please add to that list. Explain why.
Well, overseas is easy. I've never wanted to live outside India. I've been offered chairs at prestigious universities all over the world, and I can't leave this country, you know. I just can't. You know, I can go for short trips. The Times of India, I was tempted, but at that stage, my real interest was cricket. And I knew that sports journalism is not really a, you know, it's kind of a niche thing, too much of a niche thing. Delhi School of Economics law school was, Delhi School of Economics is interesting, you know. Basically, my wife, Sujata Keshavan, who's a designer, we were in Delhi, and happy, we had 2 small children. And I could have become a professor at the age of 33 at the Delhi School of Economics. My wife's design, you know, firm was doing quite well. And then one day I went to Pune for a talk on Gandhi Jayanti. I was supposed to join the Delhi School on November 1st, 1993. October 2nd, 1993, I went to Pune, which was then sort of like Bangalore, not completely overgrown, you know, a middle-sized city with a kind of deep culture. And I told Sujata, look, Delhi is an awful place for our children. Let's take them back home in Bangalore. So she said, are you crazy? You've given up this professorship? And I mean, she's been used to kind of my madness. So she said, it'll take me a year to shift my design office. So I just sat in Delhi doing nothing for a year till she organized the shift. And so it was really for children. And I'm very glad because, you know, it was completely on impulse. But Delhi gives you a kind of a, Delhi is often a bubble. You know, it's a fake kind of bubble for someone writing on politics and history. And the distance that being in Bangalore has given me, apart from the fact that the weather is glorious, it's got great parks, great bookshops. I live next to the cricket stadium, so I can watch all the cricket I want. It was completely impulse. It was like saying, you know, I think we need to, our children should not be raised in Delhi. It was really that.
But tell us more about that, the perspective that you got being away from Delhi. That's very important. How did it change your outlook, for instance, when you were writing about Gandhi, or just when you chronicle what's happening in contemporary politics at the moment?
So I think, you know,
what is the benefit of distance?
For someone like me, you know, let's say if I was in Delhi, I'd already written 3 or 4 books by then. I had started writing for the newspapers. Consistently I'd been told, you know, come for this seminar, introduce this foreign scholar, come for this TV program, come, you know, every embassy would say, come for this cocktail party, come for this annual. That's all the hell you would be doing. You know, so it's like, unless you can resist it. You know, some people can resist it. So, for example, one of the intellectuals I admire greatly, Professor Andre Bete, former professor at Delhi University and our greatest living sociologist, could stay at home and refuse every invitation. But I think I was a gregarious kind of guy. I'd be drifting from one party to another and one meeting to another. That's one danger that a writer on politics has, a scholar of politics or history has, being in Delhi. The other is a greater danger, which is that all the politicians are there. And you get a call from a minister saying, Dr. Guha, you know, I'd like you to advise me on education policy. Come to my office. And you think you're using him, but he's using you for legitimacy. And you're just hanging around thinking you're influential, whichever government is in power, it doesn't really matter. So I think being so far away gives you a certain detachment, gives you space, gives you time, and gives you intellectual and indeed, if I may say so, moral independence. And it's no accident that the best science institute is also far away from Delhi. I mean, Indian Institute of Science is here. I mean, if you set up the Indian Institute of Science in Delhi, every day you'll get a sifarish from a ministry, mere dost ko naukri de do, mere bhanja ko naukri de do, that kind of stuff, right? So I think, obviously, I have to go to Delhi to use the archives, to meet publishers, and I've been doing that all my life. But it's wonderful to be so far away from Delhi, and particularly in a city like Bangalore, because it's incredibly cosmopolitan. It's more women-friendly than most other cities in India, possibly not Bombay, but certainly the other cities. So which means for my wife, who's a design professional, or my daughter, who's an entrepreneur, it's been much easier to live. And it has this glorious climate.
When you sit then therefore far away from North India also here in Bangalore, how do you view the way things are sort of playing out in the rest of the country today, or even around you at the moment, when you step back, particularly the political atmosphere, the kind of toxicity we see in the discourse? How do you see it?
I'll answer your question two ways. One is, I've written about this in some of my columns too, there is a growing north-south divide. You know, the south is more advanced, economically, there's more, I mean, Bangalore is the center of startup entrepreneurs, many of whom are North Indians, who come from Lucknow or Moradabad or Patna, but can't do their work there, so they come here. It's more open to women, there's less intercommunal violence, so all that is historically there, now it's growing. Now the toxicity, I wonder, obviously part of it, I mean, it would be easy to blame all of it on the current regime, and the current regime certainly bears a great deal of responsibility, because it's they who, use the most vicious language. They promote fake news. I mean, if you just look yesterday about this photograph of the new airport inaugurated in outside Delhi, and it is a Chinese airport being morphed, and the Chinese are having a field day on social media saying this is what the Indians are doing.
Because our ministers shared it.
But I think it's a lot of it is social media. I mean, I was telling my daughter yesterday, I said, you're really lucky that you finished school and college, finished school before the smartphone was invented. I think I was lucky that I didn't even have television.
I agree.
I was telling her I was really lucky. You know what? She was just a 13-year-old or 14-year-old. And I think the toxicity of social media is independent of any party. You know, it's just kind of, and it makes people vulnerable, insecure. But so, I mean, social media, obviously it has some upsides. You get news very quickly. You get updated. There's a lot of humor on social media. I mean, there's some of the Twitter handles I follow are only for the fun. You know, there's I don't know whether you follow him. There's a chap called Sidin Vadakat.
Yes,
who changes his name every week.
Yeah.
You know, and he has the most hilarious, funny jokes, often aimed at Malayalis because he's a Malayali himself, right? So, and of course, a comic or a satirist like Urvish Kothari, who's from Gujarat and mocks the Gujaratis rulers in the most delightful, funny way. So there are lots of nice things about social media. But I think the one thing I would tell all of you is try and restrict the time you spend on your phone. I do not look at Twitter after 10:30 in the morning. At 1 o'clock, I will look at NDTV to see if there's any breaking news. No breaking news, I don't need to go back to Twitter. I'm not on Facebook, I'm not on Instagram. And I think it's not just good for my work and my productivity, but for my peace of mind. And I'm never happier when my phone tells me on whatever, Monday morning, last week your time on this phone was down by 8%.
Mine keeps going up.
So I think that's, obviously you need social media. The smartphone gives you so much access to things. But you really have to, I think social media and technology are in danger of consuming us, and particularly the young, and particularly during the pandemic when they don't meet their peers.
What happens when you become the news? A couple of years ago, you were protesting against the Citizenship Amendment Act, and you were picked up by the police, and it played out on live television, and we did an interview after that. It was horrendous what happened. Did that in any way sort of deter you, or did you ever think twice about what you might want to say about an issue like the CAA or anything else that the country faces today?
No, so I'll answer that honestly. So that particular protest I had to do. I am absolutely proud of what I did because it's a discriminatory act. The CAA discriminates against our largest minority. I'm a biographer of Mahatma Gandhi, and if Mahatma Gandhi lived and died for Hindu-Muslim harmony, I know what he would have thought of that act. So as a biographer of Gandhi, although I was in my 60s, I had to go out and protest. There was no question about it, right? The other things I've done, the other excessively clever tweets I may have issued, which have made me the object of, brought me to the news, which in retrospect, I think was foolish. So one has to be careful, when a scholar or wants to be in the news, make sure it's for something not just that is worthwhile, but where your expertise is relevant. So one of the things I do now is tweet much less, but I do tweet sometimes when I think it's important. For example, when the Indian Air Force is called in to help an election rally in UP, I have to remind younger people that our constitution says that the armed forces should be independent of politics. And I also then direct them to a very good book by Stephen Wilkinson about why Nehru and Patel wanted the armed forces to be separate from politics. So there have been times in the past where I've regretted being too impulsive, but that protest against the CAA, I think was, I had to do it. I would do it again tomorrow. And of course, I had the full support of my family. I told my Sujata that morning, I said, I'm likely to be detained, but I have to go. And it happened. It happened in a rather spectacular way. Which was fine. And you also think of your obligations. I am Gandhi's biographer. If there's anything, Gandhi gave his life for Hindu-Muslim harmony. That was and is, regardless of being passed in Parliament and regardless of the Supreme Court sitting on it for 2 years, an utterly discriminatory act that completely violates morality, decency, and our constitutional values. I mean, on that there can be no doubt. And I had to go and protest. I would do the same thing tomorrow. But again, to go back to why you must be selective. So that happened in December 2019. So a few months later, the farm protest started. Right. And I got several calls from farmers' organizations in Karnataka saying, Sir, Dr. Guha, please come, we're having a meeting, we want you. So I said, look, I don't write on agriculture. I write on democracy, constitutionalism, Gandhi, biography. No, but you went and protested for that. So I said, I understand something about that. So it's important for scholars not to become all-purpose activists. You must be a citizen. There's a citizen me. I protest when the things that matter to me, on which I have something to say. But there could be a tendency for a well-known writer to succumb to the seduction of being in the news all the time. And I think that's something I often keep on telling myself. It's nice to be on the front page of the paper. It's nice to have people writing about you. But that's ephemeral. What really matters is the books you write and the depth of your research and your scholarship. So restrain yourself. But that particular day, Nidhi, I had to go because of what that act represented. And I owed it to my work on Gandhi to protest against discrimination against Muslims.
Can I ask you then that if you had to do it all over again, would you still do a protest like that? And I ask this in the context of the fact that I think this regime has made it very clear that now civil society is the enemy too, right? Yeah. So how do you think that could possibly play out in the world's largest democracy?
No, I think our claims to being the world's largest democracy are being eroded by the day. In my book, India After Gandhi, I called India 50-50 democracy. I would probably call it a 25-75 democracy today. And it's also true, it must be said in fairness, that chief ministers who do not belong to the BJP also don't like citizens' protest very much. Jayalalitha never liked it. For example, I'm not sure about Mamta and others. But it's very important to have a citizen's voice so long as you're non-violent. I think the most remarkable thing about the farmers' protest was it was virtually completely non-violent for a year, despite the extreme provocation. You can argue about whether what they were protesting against was worth it. But I think it's non-violent protest, individual or collective, must always be the right of the citizen. That's on issues that are important, not just, as I said, for me, I would not, I would go for things that matter to me and where I have some expertise. I know that this law is wrong, and I would do it, and well, I think what is happening in India today is part of a worldwide trend. It's happening in countries around the world, where the idea is that you win an election and then you're immune from criticism for the next 5 years. It's happening in countries like Turkey and Hungary and Russia, and even Trump tried it in America. And a democracy is about everyday accountability by parliament, by the media.
You see the list of countries you just named.
Yeah.
I mean, except the US.
Yeah.
But the rest of them, do we really want to be in that group?
We are becoming, whether we like it or not, we are going there. We are going there. And it's still not, you see, it's still not as dire as people say. For example, some left-wing critics of the government carelessly throw out the word fascism. Now, this is not a fascist regime. You and I would not be talking if it was a fascist regime. We are talking in a BJP-ruled state, as it happens. There are many states that are not ruled by the BJP. It is becoming less democratic and more authoritarian in a creeping way. And like some other countries around the world, and that should worry all of us. Because I think it's also, the other things that are problematic about India today. But you see, it's very important to have information. I believe, I'm one of those who believes, that if the Prime Minister was to hold a monthly press conference, he would be a better Prime Minister because he would get honest feedback. And it could be restricted to, it doesn't have to be, Twitter trolls. He can have, some really good experts, journalists, cross-section of them, and answer questions. He would be so the best policies are based on debate, dialogue, information, feedback. And it could be in parliament, it could be through the media, it could be through peaceful citizens' protests. Authoritarianism never makes for good policy.
All right. I have a lot more to ask you, but I have to open this up to the students now. And whoever would like to ask Ram Guha a question, you can raise your hand. We'll have a mic sent across to you. Who would like to ask the first question? Should I put my glasses on? I know a lot of you submitted questions, so don't be shy now. Yes, I heard a voice. Yes, please go ahead.
What do you want to tell people that they have opted a career but they are not interested in?
Not in the?
Interested in the career that they took.
What would you advise those who have chosen a career that they actually don't want to do? I mean, something that they don't want to do. Maybe because their parents were not as nice as yours.
Yeah. I would say, I'm one who writes and lets people make what they can of writing. I don't usually advise people per se. I mean, I have 2 children and I'm not succeeded very much in giving them advice which they follow. So I'd say, look, make sure that when you change your career, it's for something you think you really enjoy. But don't carry on for the sake of carrying on, unless it's absolutely important for your subsistence. If you have to live, you have to have that salary at the end of the month. But job fulfillment is, I think, very, it makes for a much happier life. Yes. What I'd also advise for people who are in a career they like, and which maybe many people in this room, is supposing you're a doctor or a lawyer or a corporate executive or working in marketing or in social media, in influencing, and you like the job. Never make that job consume 24 hours of your life. Cultivate an interest in music or film or literature, and that will make you a more rounded human being. You'll enjoy yourself more and you'll return refreshed to your main job. So even if you're in a career that you really like, one of the problems with many professions is that the friends particularly in India, the friends that they have are only from that profession. Doctors are only hanging around with doctors, lawyers are only hanging with doctors, journalists are only hanging around with journalists. That's utterly boring. Diversify your circle of friends to outside your profession. Start, cultivating an interest, as I said, in art, in music, in literature, in travel. And even if you like your job, you'll like it much more if you don't see it as everything in your life.
Okay, so sir, what do you think about our education system?
That's a very large question.
That's a very, very large question. Okay, I'd have to pass the mic on to other people. Yes, please, go ahead.
You want to?
Good afternoon, sir.
Yeah.
So here at the right side.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Hi, sir. How are you, sir?
Thanks.
So I'm Madhunika. So there's a small question that is, the people who are, we have chosen many careers here. What is the principles that we have to do the best in our career?
Yeah. So,
A lot of career advice you're being asked for today.
So, don't assume you'll reach the top. Do it because you like it and you enjoy it and you want to be part of a team. When I started out doing my PhD, I never thought I'd write these books or the books would be read. Do it for the sake of what it is all about, is what I would say. Success may come, may not come. Even if success does not come fully, even if you don't become MD of your company, you may have a happy family life, you may have a loving marriage, which not many people are. You may have nice children, you may have good friends. So have a more broad-minded approach to life, is what I would say.
Thank you, sir.
There is someone here?
Excuse me, sir.
Yeah.
Here. Good afternoon, sir. Sir, could you look here?
Oh, okay,
Right
you're
there.
that side. On your
Yeah.
left. On
Yeah.
your left. This.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, sir. Sir, basically, I asked this question to my professor, and I'd like to ask the same question to you. Like, recently we completed 75 years of independence,
Right.
and still we are a developing country. And my question is, after 25 years, we'll be completing 100 years of independence.
Yeah.
Still, would we be a developing nation or would we be a developed nation?
It's hard for me to predict. I'm not an astrologer. So, India was born in very difficult circumstances. The fact that we are still one country, we are still democratic, is a great achievement. That we have all this diversity. We must pay much more attention, not just to economic development, but to social development, to education, to health, to women's rights. The so-called developed countries today took centuries to reach where they are. England started industrializing in the 17th century. So I think this idea that India must be very rich, very strong, must be tempered with a different idea, which is that India must be at peace with itself, must give dignity to its citizens, and of course must not let anyone starve, or must not let anyone not have access to decent education or health and so on. But this kind of competitive attitude, mujhe first aana hai, I have to beat the other guy, is I think a problem. I don't think that's how we should look at it.
Okay. And one last question, sir, before I leave. Should youth be involved in politics? Should they be coming in, taking leadership?
Youth.
No, sir, youth.
Youth. Yes. They should be involved in politics. They should be first involved in community organization. So if there is an issue in their locality, about, shall we say, waste management, or about infrastructure, or about harassment of women in their locality, or about, not giving apartments to somebody because they're from a particular religion. Start with that. Don't say, I want to become Prime Minister tomorrow, or I want to join the Congress Party or the BJP. Start with public service in your locality, which could be your college, your village, your colony and so on, and then take it from there. If you like public engagement, if you like dealing with people, if you like organizing, then get into politics.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Who's next?
Yes, sir. Right here.
Young lady, yeah. This young lady I was meeting. Go ahead.
Yes, sir. My name is Francisco. My question is, do you believe that if India embraced capitalism and had less government intervention, it would be much faster for it to become a developed country rather than developing?
If India what?
If India embraced capitalism, or at the very least embraced capitalism more, or at the very least decreased government intervention, it would reach the goals that you aspire to much faster. Do you believe it?
So you're right that I am a supporter of the 1991 reforms. We needed to liberalize. We need to give entrepreneurs room to innovate. Capitalism generates wealth and jobs, but it also generates inequalities, and it also generates environmental degradation. And capitalism can't assure you good schools and hospitals. So I'm kind of on this issue of capitalism versus socialism. I'm a middle of the road kind of guy. You know, I'm an admirer of countries like Canada and Sweden, where you have the state takes care of, you know, social facilities and social goods, but you have a robust entrepreneurial sector where people produce what they want. And I think some parts of India, like Kerala, have done very good work on social development, but have not nurtured capitalism. You know, there may be other parts of India, Maharashtra would be a good example, lots of wealth, but disastrous facilities for working class people. So I have a middle of I'm not a socialist, but I'm not an unreconstructed capitalist either. I think there's a role for the market, a very important role for the market, but there are three pillars, and this is what something Raghuram Rajan has also argued in his book. The market is required to generate wealth, opportunity, jobs. The state is required to generate a level playing field. So affirmative action is important because otherwise Brahmins will get all the top jobs. Affirmative action for women may be important, otherwise men through power will claim all the positions of prestige. So the state is important for equality of opportunity, the market is important for generating wealth and jobs, and civil society is important for providing a critical gaze on both the government and the market. So for example, if I may give you an illustration of a movement I was involved in many, many years ago, probably certainly before most of you were born. There was a factory in northern Karnataka called Harihar Polyfibers, which was on the banks of the Tungabhadra river. It was a private sector factory and it was polluting the river. And some of my friends organized a major protest campaign which they took to the Supreme Court to make sure that that factory would not pollute the river. But if you leave it to the market, they'd be happy because they don't want to put in the costs of a pollution treating machine. So the market by itself cannot ensure environmental sustainability, nor can it assure equality of opportunity. So you need market, state, and civil society all. And that's what, in my view, countries like Canada and Sweden and some of the Western European countries have achieved.
I'll take another question before I come back. Yes, go ahead.
Good afternoon. Question is open for both of you on the stage. According to the International Press Index, Freedom Index, India stands at the 142nd rank, posing it as one of the most dangerous countries for people who took up profession as journalism or who are peeping into politics. So what's your comment on this? What is the it's like hampering the interest of the budding journalists or everyone. What's your comment on this?
You should answer. I'll answer it after you. You go ahead.
Well, I mean, my view on this is that I think it's a crying shame that India is ranked so poorly on the World Press Freedom Index, and this is, I think, the second straight year that India actually ranked this badly. And what is interesting is that while the government has sort of pretended or to say that it doesn't care about these rankings, the Hindu had reported and other newspapers had reported that actually the government was actively lobbying with the organization, the RSF, that brings out these rankings to say, no, well, actually we are very good for journalists, for democracy, etc. Look, press freedom is not hampered in India. But I think that there is, and it's not like India's ranking was great before. I think we were only up by about 3 or 4 positions earlier, and we've gone down. So we are in the company of Nigeria, somewhere near us, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia. So these are not countries that you should be happy to be in as far as rights and freedoms are concerned. And the fact that journalists today you have sedition cases, not just journalists, but any dissenters, but journalists essentially. You look at Siddiq Kapan's case in UP, FIRs are filed, cases are filed with impunity. Somebody reported on a bad midday meal scheme in UP and found a police case against him. You hear about a lot of the high profile cases like Vinod Dua's that went all the way up to the Supreme Court. But you look at field reporters on the ground in so many states across the country that are facing cases, police cases for just reporting on government inefficiencies or bad schemes. And that does not speak well of us, as a democracy. So I think, yes, it reflects very poorly.
I'll just add to what Nidhi said. So obviously one aspect of press freedom is intimidating journalists from reporting. But there's the other side, which is also equally worrying in India today, which is channels becoming propaganda outlets. During the emergency when I was young, All India Radio was known as All Indira Radio. That was a state channel. But now many of our private television channels, NDTV being an honorable exception, essentially parrot the government line on everything, often distorting the facts to support the government. So harassing journalists is bad, and promoting state propaganda is also bad, and we have both of them, which is really what is deeply worrying. Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm going to come back to a few more audience questions after this, but I just wanted to ask you, in the context of the farm protests and the recent announcement by the Prime Minister that these would be repealed, how do you see this in terms of being as a critical point? Do you think it is a critical point? It's a turning point that mass protest still matters, civil disobedience, or that this still matters, or was this just a cold political calculation by the BJP?
I think it's both, but let's rewind about a year and a bit. As I said, I did not take part in a protest against the farm laws because I'm not a student of agriculture, but I am a student of Indian democracy. And what was wrong about the farm laws was, even if they were well-intentioned, well-designed, they did not follow democratic procedure. Agriculture is a state subject. The states were not consulted. The laws were drafted in the PMO, probably without even the Union Minister of Agriculture giving an input, because that's how things happen in this government. They were taken to the Lok Sabha, where the BJP has a majority, rushed through, where in fact they should have been discussed by a select committee. Then in Rajya Sabha, a fake vote was taken, not a proper vote. So the farmers saw through all the dishonest ways in which democratic procedures had been bypassed. There was no consultation, there was no feedback from the states, there was no meeting with farmers' unions. Even there was contempt shown by Parliament in the way the laws were passed by a voice vote in the Rajya Sabha. So they took to the streets because they felt that isko dal mein kala hai, it is not okay. And I mean, as I said, their protest was incredibly dignified and noble and heroic. 700 farmers died. Why were the farm laws withdrawn? Most likely because of the UP election, but one can't tell. But it showed two things. One, it showed protest works, and it showed also that elections are not completely fixed, that the BJP, despite their command of money, finances, media, administration, was and is nervous about UP. So I think it was an important moment in the pushback against authoritarianism.
All right. I want to ask you also about the fact that something I mentioned in my introduction, that you are often very outspokenly critical even of those who might be more ideologically aligned to your point of view. And that includes, of course, the Congress party. You are scathing in your criticism of the way the Congress does its politics today, and sort of therefore the opposition as well. Given that you follow Indian politics the way that you do, what do you foresee ahead of 2024? Yeah. Does the opposition have what it takes to actually challenge the BJP?
So I'd say, first of all, Nidhi, that it's very important for a writer not to be identified with any political party, or still less any politician. So I have a point of view. I am a liberal constitutionalist. I've explained to that young man there that why I believe you need capitalism, the state, and civil society. I'm a liberal constitutionalist. I'm not a Marxist, and I'm not a Hindutva-wadi. I'm equally opposed to extremism of left and right. I'm a believer and admirer in the values of the Indian Constitution, which I will protect and try and defend through my writings. In the case of the Congress party, it's clear I'm also a historian of the freedom struggle. And the Congress party of today bears no resemblance to the party of Gandhi and of Patel and indeed of Jawaharlal Nehru. Jawaharlal Nehru himself would have been appalled that his great-grandson and great-granddaughter are controlling the Congress party today. I have no doubt, as someone who studied Nehru in some detail, he would have been appalled. And the problem is not just that the Gandhis are fifth-generation dynasts, they're incompetent. They're useless at winning elections. Despite all the press coverage of what Priyanka has done in UP, it's unlikely they will get more than a few seats. And because general elections are becoming presidential, you oppose Modi to Rahul Gandhi, Modi will win as he did in 2014, 2019, and again in 2024. And having a terribly weak opposition is damaging for Indian democracy. You know, farmers' protests and independent journalists and public intellectuals cannot substitute for a vigorous, viable party opposition. And that's why I think the decline, the self-willed, self-inflicted decline of the Congress party is as much of a tragedy for Indian democracy as the authoritarianism of the Modi regime.
What does that mean for the rest of the opposition, though? Today you see a Mamata Banerjee trying to expand her party. You see the Aam Aadmi Party trying to do the same. Can they really replace the pan-India organization of the Congress?
Not in the short term, not in the short term, but clearly they're desperate. They see that the Congress is going nowhere. But there are many things the Congress could have done. I mean, just to, again, rewind 5 years to 2018. In 2018, if they had any sense, when they won the state elections in MP and in Rajasthan, they should have made Scindia Chief Minister of Madhya Pradesh because he was much younger than Kamal Nath. They should have made Pilot Chief Minister of Rajasthan and maybe shifted Gehlot to become president of the party. I mean, Gehlot is a smart, capable party man, you know. So they were not thinking beyond the family. I think Sonia Gandhi cannot think beyond her children. Look at the way, the often almost ruthless way in which the BJP gets rid of older, non-performing chief ministers. Yediyurappa in my state, for example, because they're thinking of the future for their party beyond their family. Now, so clearly, if you don't have the Gandhis have to go if the Congress is ever to revive. Doesn't appear as if the Gandhis are going anywhere, which means other parties like the TMC and the Aam Aadmi Party sense an opportunity to slowly, steadily encroach into the Congress space, which can't happen in 2 years or 3 years, but may in 5 or 10.
So when left liberals attack you for this position and say that Ram Guha, you are, sort of attacking the Congress, you're compromising on your sort of anti-Hindutva ideals by going after the Congress and Rahul Gandhi in this way. What do you say?
No, I think the Gandhi family are Modi's best allies and accomplices. I mean, that's the objective fact. As a historian, a student, that's basically what it is. So I'm happy with, criticism is fine, and abusive criticism is also fine wherever it comes from. But just look at this. I mean, look at what happened in 2014, 2019. Rahul Gandhi could not retain his own seat in Amethi. He's been 15 years an MP from Amethi. He can't speak Hindi. He speaks Doon school Hindi. If that. Look at what happened in the last general election. The strike rate of the BJP where they opposed the Congress was close to 90%. The strike rate of the BJP where they opposed regional parties was closer to 60%, much less. So the facts are very clear. They may be nice guys. I mean, Rahul Gandhi can become a civil society leader. Let him revive the, he may be a perfectly decent fellow. He may be better off running a civil society organization, and being a independent critic of all that the government is doing wrong, but without being the leader of the Congress party.
This is what I like about Ram Guha, because he doesn't hold back, whether it's criticism of the current regime, the Hindutva politics, or of the opposition and the Congress in particular. We have time for at least 2-3 more questions. So if you have
young lady right here.
Okay, please go ahead.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, it's on.
Good afternoon, sir. My name is Prerna. Sir, we made our India as a democratic country. We, in the sense, our ancestors and our forefathers. But still, just to end the corruption, we made our country as a democratic country. But still the corruption is running, and we as the young blood, we all want to end the corruption. And as you said, the program name is a Changemakers. So we couldn't find at least a single reason to end the corruption. So what is your comment on
No, I think that's a very good question, because corruption is there at all levels.
Yes, sir.
Now, one level is, when you get a driving license or a electricity connection, you often have to bribe a local person. When you want to start a company, you may have to do other kinds of things. And that's been a major failure of all state governments and central governments. There's also now centralized corruption, for example, the election funding scheme, which is totally opaque. And there have been some good books on it. I can recommend them. There was a good book written by S. Guhan some years ago on corruption in India. But it is an issue that we have not, the BJP promised a Lokpal, there is no Lokpal. The RTI Act is being unwound everywhere. So it is a huge issue. And I think one advantage of, that's one of the duties of the press. Obviously, one of the duties of the press is to report on corruption. In fact, some of the murders of journalists have been on those who have been writing on corruption, particularly related to mining and so on. So there's no question that we are not a very honest society, and that is keeping us back.
Sir, as you are a historian, so how would be the corruption in the history before our country was a democratic?
So I can't say about India, but in countries like America, for example, 100 years ago, America was incredibly corrupt. And the press and the courts played a very important role in cleaning up corruption. So I think the press and the courts too, we've not talked much about the courts, but the courts, like for the Supreme Court, not to have heard the election bonds case for more than 2 years is deeply worrying. Here you have, it's secret. I have run a company, I give money to any party, and the party knows, because it's with the State Bank of India, the government knows, but no one else. Funding should be transparent. I should be able to say, I have given, as in America, you have to declare it. I have given so much money to the Democrats, so much money to the Republicans. So I think the courts and the media, more than individuals, more than citizens like you and me, because we are the victims of individual corruption. We can't fight, the guy who's come to give us a license. We can't say, I won't give you 500 rupees or 5,000 rupees. It's only the courts and the media that have to expose the corruption, which they have failed in.
Sir, this is Aman, third year CSE, sir. Youngsters being the future of our country, how important is it for the youngsters to understand things happening and especially react on things, sir? Because most of the families or the parents are scared to react, and the youngsters, are not interested in reacting.
So that's a good question. I would say understand first, then react. So understanding is prior to reacting. So often people react without understanding. For example, this is not true just of young people, but most people on social media react without understanding. So understand first. You're in a university, study, understand. Once you feel you've understood something quite clearly, and there's something you feel unhappy about and you want to make your voice heard, then react. Obviously, you'll have to negotiate with your parents and all of that and so on, but understanding must precede action. Particularly in university, you must remember, don't react without having studied the subject you want to react about rather thoroughly.
One last question. Okay.
Sir, my name is Satya, sir. Sir, what is your biggest risk as an author, sir?
Biggest?
Risk.
What is the biggest risk you took as an author, you think?
The biggest risk as I took as an author? I think it was writing India after Gandhi.
Why?
Because it was completely new. I've written many books. Every other book I wanted to write. I started as a historian of I wrote a book on the Chipko movement. I wanted to write on the Chipko movement. I wrote a biography of Verrier Elvin, the anthropologist. I wanted to write that. Later on, I wanted to write on Gandhi. I wanted to write on cricket. India after Gandhi, a publisher came to me and said, this was in 1997, India had turned 50. Why did you write a history of a country? I said, what? He said, yeah, the whole country from, I said, he was an Englishman, so I couldn't tell him, tu pagal hai kya? But that's what I wanted to tell him. So it was and I was blank because people had written about the colonial period, no one had written about this. So I had to start totally in a blank state. What are the sources, what are the subjects, what are the themes? And the contract I signed said the book is due in 3 years, it took 10 years. And I enjoyed it also the most, writing that book. But for a long time I felt such an extraordinary scope. Large, diverse, complicated, cacophonous, conflict-ridden country, 50 years of its tumultuous history. How the hell will I do it? So for a long time in my laptop, all my notes, which I was gathering for the book, were in a large folder called mythical history book. So I thought this book will never be written, mythical history book. So it was an extraordinary challenge, and it was a big risk, and I think modestly it worked, but because of the scale of the challenge, you tried to think of writing a history of independent India in all its dimensions: politics, sociology, constitution, regionalism, secession, war with Pakistan, war with China, food scarcity, all of that. So though I enjoyed it hugely, I think in terms of a risk, that is the biggest risk I took. Yeah.
So my final question is, what is next? Because there is another book coming, isn't there?
Yeah, so I have a book coming next year, which is about 7 foreigners who joined the freedom struggle, which is done, it will be out. I have other books to write. One day I will write a memoir of what it means to be a historian, a quarrelsome historian living in India. That may have to be published posthumously so that no one can sue me, but that's okay. The other books to write.
Ram Guha, always a pleasure to talk to you and to interact with you. Thank you very much for joining us here at GITAM University. Please, a big round of applause for Ram Guha.
Thank you. It's very enjoyable.
Thank you. I'd like to invite our Pro Vice Chancellor, Professor Rao, to please give you a little gift on our behalf.